Brian, I have to say, I love the fact we'd only been out of the meeting for a day or two, and we got an email from you already started thinking about what you were doing. So thanks for the proactive and the share.
Absolutely.
So I just want to do a couple of things before we get started. And when we get started, what I'm going to ask everybody to do is start to talk about what you've seen as you look at the ways to deploy that relate to you and that you want to go attack, and then talk about how you're going to attack them and what concerns you about it and what looks easy or hard or fun or however you want to approach it. Because we're really going to go now from trying to understand all this stuff to what you're really going to do with it. That makes sense to everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
And hopefully that's what you thought we were going to do today. I just want to go over a half a dozen slides that we've all seen before, but I just want to kind of drive home how important they are. And I grabbed mostly slides out of this. How do you control your revenue strategy and your resources that are required to do this and kind of keep that caustic chaos off the table? One of the ways to think about applying revenue science is to think about it similar to your 401k or your retirement planning, or however you think about your financial investments. Because we all see people who go at those in different ways. And some people are willing to take huge amounts of risk. You know, they were people, let's see, Brian, I am going to try and mute you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, why don't you mute it and then you can control it when you want to come off mute.
Okay.
Rick, can you guys hear me? Billy?
Yep.
Brian?
Yeah.
Okay, I don't know why my video's not working. I brought my laptop with a camera, but it's not working for some reason.
Well,
But I can see you guys and hear you, so.
Okay. As long as you're good, because we can hear you fine, Joe.
Yeah, you don't want to see my ugly mug anyway, so.
No, I miss you, buddy. When you think about deploying revenue science, it's like deploying a 401k. When people put money in their 401k and they have a discipline around it, you can put a small amount of money in for your whole life and get a reasonable return, and 20, 30, 40 years later, you really have millions of dollars because of compounding and just the regular growth of the industry or the market or whatever is going on around you. Where people get in trouble with that strategy is where they get a few bucks and then they decide they're going to go into investing in apartments or investing in things that they're really not good at. And the next thing you know, they've either lost part of it, or if it was 2006, you may have lost all of it that you invested. And revenue strategy is the same kind of way. That's where the cost of chaos, dumb stuff, not following through with the discipline, all of a sudden is subtracting from our opportunity to grow. And in businesses, sometimes that somebody wants to do a trade show and it's only 20 grand, or they want to hire another person and they're only 40,000, or they want to do a big SEO campaign and nobody's thought these things through, and all of a sudden you're out 20, 40, 80, $100,000 with no return on them whatsoever. And so part of what I want to talk about is certain metrics for you to think about, that if you keep these in the front of your mind as you deploy, things will be much, much, much better and better fast. It's back to our Dr. Demings telling us that bad systems beat good people. And too often, one of the complaints we hear is, well, my people aren't doing the job. most of the time that means we haven't finished building a good system for them. And so nobody hired a person thinking they were bad. And so if we hired people we believed were good when we hired them, maybe when they're not performing, part of it's we didn't create a good enough structure. The roadmap that we've built for them is incomplete, or it's not aligned. And so as we go forward, you know, I want you to keep these few slides in your mind for everything you do. When we don't intentionally create a complete offer, we can't expect people to do a good job selling it or delivering it. We also can't expect that we're going to get the margin that we should be entitled to. So not creating an intentional offer costs us margin. It probably costs us deals, and it definitely slows down the flow, and it makes scale almost impossible. So as you think about your businesses and you think about what you're going to do, be very intentional about creating a manageable number of offers, because each offer takes resources, and if the offer is not returning resources, that's having a big impact on your ability to grow and scale. Remember, the offer is what travels the roadmap. It's what we're trying to increase velocity, volume, and value with. So when you think about that offer and you think how you're building it, think about how people are going to hear about it, what they're going to find when they investigate it, what is going to excite them when they start to qualify, do they want to know more, and what values they're going to return when you start to develop that statement of work and ultimately deliver the product to them. So be very intentional about that. There's a simple set of metrics to manage the flow, because the flow is a combination of at least 3 of your departments. And whether you have these departments as separate humans or not, the functions exist in every company for every offer, every product, every service. Somebody has got to find the suspects, get them excited about what you do, help them understand the value, so that when you talk about the fee, they're already excited that the value and the fee are aligned, they make sense. Then somebody else is responsible to take that momentum and turn it into a scope of work that both parties want to sign and both parties are glad that they execute. Whether you call it sales or you call it some other form of sales engineering, or it's quoting, or whatever you want to call it, it's the function that takes the people who are excited about the offer and moves them to a contract. And then delivery, some of you do delivery all the time, some of you do sales, some of you do both of them, and marketing, we all do. But these are the metrics. Can I get the right number of the right type of leads into sales, so sales can close a certain percentage that has a certain margin in a certain period of time, and that delivery wants to deliver. And delivery can deliver those on time, on budget, and thrill the customers. So as you look about managing this, that's the process we're managing, and it needs to be intentional. Then the last slide, and you've all seen this one before, but it's really recognizing that when you think about your brand and you think about how well your team executes, those are part of the same picture. If people don't believe and trust and aren't excited about your brand, you will not get a chance to execute. If you execute extremely well, but nobody knows who you are, that's not going to work. So recognize those two things go hand in glove. And brand is a result of, do I have a strategy, and is my organization aligned around it? Because if I don't have a strategy, I cannot have an aligned organization. And those two things have to come together also. So as you're looking at what you're going to do to deploy, make sure you don't lose track of those two. And then finally, the investments you make in structure, always create the habit to always ask yourself the question, if I invest in this, what's the leverage that I'm going to get back? And leverage means I'll either get more of the right type at the right time, we'll close more better deals faster, or we'll be able to deliver more to the customer that they'll pay us more for. So when we're making investments in SEO, hiring more people, trade shows, new equipment, new software, whatever those investments are, the purpose of those is to create additional leverage. So does that make sense as kind of a place to start?
Yep.
Okay. So today, as I said, what I want to do is I want you to start telling each other and me, 1, 2, maybe 3 areas that we laid out in the homework last week, and I've got them up here on slides, the long term, the flow and market, the communication, metrics, whatever those are, that you want to work on. And when you think about working on them, think about there's a short-term element to it. And so where does that start? And Brian, that's why I applaud what you sent us the other day, because you picked a place to start that in the short term can actually, get you some new information and help you make another decision and move things forward. So that was perfect. And so I want you to identify those places in the short term. Then what I want you to do with those is, for example, with Brian's, my question for him in a little while will be, what are the outcomes that you're going to track as a result of having done that? So that when you make this investment, that's back to what's the leverage you're looking for, and leverage is a result of outcomes. More people reach out to you, more people refer more business to you, more people come back with additional business. What are the outcomes that you're expecting? It could be internal outcomes that you expect. Now our sales team knows more about the customers, so they'll be able to shorten the sales cycle because they'll have better conversations. Whatever those outcomes are, go into the activity with expectations of why you did it. And then we're going to measure whether we're getting those kinds of things, because that's what allows us continuous improvement. That we know what we want to do, we see if it works, we learn from it, and then we figure out how to keep doing it better. So then once you've got some short-term metrics identified, then start to ask yourself the question, where is my flow going to be improved? In the exam, and I'm making yours up here for you, Brian. Thank you for sending it. But to me, I could look at that and say, well, the flow could be improved because people say, hey, they care what we think. So particularly in your service side of it, you get more service business, you get more referrals. The people who own 20 properties and you're doing 1 or 2, now you're doing 4. So I don't know for sure what you're looking for out of it. It also could be my team now knows more about my customer, so my team is actually going to shorten the sales cycle or find the right people because they have a better idea of who the right people are. So think about what the impact will be on your flow. And a simple way to think about this is exactly what people do in a factory that produces parts. You take a look at a machine and you say, the machine's supposed to do 100 units, it's only doing 80. Is it a problem of raw material, operator not trained? You're constantly trying to figure out how to get the machine to the maximum productivity. And so this is no different. And then after you've identified how you want to impact the flow, you got some idea of the metrics, then it's this, how do we continuously improve it? And how do we help train our team to, celebrate the success, but also look for what do we do next? Then for the long term, think about this same problem you're working on or this same opportunity to improve flow. And, now ask yourself, if I improve my knowledge of the customer, will that help me with my quoting? Or will that help me with some other part of my business that could be another one of these areas I work on? Because one of the things about revenue science, none of these things are separate. So if you think about how do I tie two together that create a whole lot of leverage, then you're starting to really get some kind of return. So that's the function for us today, is to talk about those kinds of things for each one of you. And then here's my request for the future. I'd like you to keep track of what you're doing, what you're learning, the outcomes you're getting, because I'd like you to share those with your Vistage group in our August meeting. So we'll have 3 or 4 months to work on some of this stuff, and share with them exactly what you found. If it's working, great. If it's not working, share that too. But that's part of the reason we're doing this, is to help everybody figure out that deployment isn't rocket science. It does take some discipline and some structure. And then also continue to keep track, because I'm going to ask you again to come back in November, where we've got 6 months of doing this, and talk about how you're going to take deployment into 2020. And also share that with the group so that they get some of the learning from what we're doing here together. And, you know, I've been thinking about this, and this is totally up to the 4 of you, but I'm willing to do a monthly call after our 4th call in this series to try and help mentor, coach, whatever it is that you need to keep doing this through the end of the year. So if that's something that's desirable, I'll volunteer to work with you through the end of the year. We'll do 1 2-hour session, you know, every month, so that as you're out deploying and you're making changes and stuff's working and not working, you have a place to come back, share with everybody else, get the new idea, and then take it forward. So that's our agenda for today and going forward, if that works out for everybody. Okay. Who wants to share with us what you've been thinking about 1 or 2 of these areas, or 3, I wouldn't go beyond 3, that you really want to start deploying? And as you think about them, what does that look like for you? What's the opportunity? What's the challenge? Do you know where to start? Where are you going to start? How are you going to measure it? And just, it's a share with the team, get feedback from them. And of course, I have trouble keeping my mouth shut, so I'll end up talking at some point. Somebody raise their hand and I'll unmute them. Oh, no hands. This is going to be, I don't want to talk that much today, guys. Who wants to start? Come on.
I'll go.
Okay. We got Billy. Oh, I didn't unmute you, Billy. I thought I did.
What's that?
Okay, you're unmuted now.
You there? Good?
You're good.
All right. So one area that I want to focus on is the communication with the customer. So a big part of what we're trying to do is the key. One of the key offers is customization. So we really need a customer that's engaged and willing to communicate with us. And we are we're kind of starting that process now. We had our first phone call with our customer today. So we're right at the forefront of this. And we're kind of testing the waters to see what works. But I really would like to define kind of how that communication works, who's involved, how often it occurs, what the agenda is when we meet, and kind of off of those meetings figure out, you know, is there any type of, are there communication points throughout the, between those meetings, and where do those come from, and how often do those things need to happen. Also, we want to talk about the channels of communication. We're finding that a phone call is sometimes hard to make happen. So is it email? Is it a chat client? Is it, does it have to be in person? So that's one key thing. That's one thing that we're looking at. And I think is going to be key for us succeeding is really nailing that down. The other part that I wanted to focus on was, Rick, you had a slide with, I think it was the last slide. It was the, what was it? The revenue resources required.
Yeah.
I'm really having a hard time defining what this is going to cost. I have a general idea of what the development time is going to be like, but I'd really like to have a profit margin target by the end of this thing, just to kind of build off of and see where it can go as we find ways of scaling this out. And so I get kind of lost when we talk about like cost of goods sold. I think is very minimal for us, just because it's we really have no royalties with what we're doing,
Right.
And it really is all software. So I think I get that top portion, but then you get into the fixed expenses. I don't really know how to measure that, especially with regards to it. I mean, it's only a part of what we're doing, because, running the AC is also supporting our other, our other product that we sell. And then the revenue resources required at the bottom, I feel like I have a pretty good idea of how that works, but I would still like some direction there.
Okay. All right. First, and I'll make sure I get 2 cents in here, Billy, but I'd like to hear from everybody else on what ideas, advice, questions you have of Billy. Think of this as almost a Vistage issue processing kind of situation. And I would suggest we break this into 2 parts. The first part's the communication, help give him some structure as to how to communicate, because that is huge. And I will tell you, Billy, the structure part of the communication will have a huge impact on your revenue resources required. That part I'll guarantee you before we even start. So who's got some either questions or suggestions or clarification for Billy?
Billy, it's Joe. Are you talking like specific language terms in your industry that you're trying to talk to these guys about, or as far as them understanding the new product that you're coming out with?
It's more of just getting the specs from the customer.
What they need?
What they need, yeah. And just defining that, because what we found so far is that they really want to minimize the amount of time they're putting into that part of it, even though we're saying, hey, we're offering our services, we'll build whatever it is you need. They really don't want to put in the time. So, I mean, they are putting in the time, but it's not perfect. And we're trying to figure out how to kind of balance that part of it, not taking up all of their time, and being able to kind of provide, what we know of the problem, and solving some of the issues for them. So that's, we certainly want to minimize the amount of resources it takes on both ends.
Right. But you're really trying to get them to basically agree to spend enough time with you on the phone to get you to understand what they need from you.
Yes.
And that's really struggle.
Yeah, that's well, it's early on, and it has been a little bit of a struggle so far.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Some other questions of Billy? Some ideas for him? I'll give you a couple, Billy, and these apply to everybody, and they're pretty much universal, okay? First, in any communication, when we talk about thinking from the buyer's frame of reference, and you've heard me say that so much it's kind of boring. But in the situation you're in, Billy, the way to make this valuable for you and them is communicate about things that they're going to care about, and by your getting clarification, you're better positioned to answer their problem. So it's not you asking them a direct, what do you want question. It's you asking them to clarify, explore, go deeper about how they want this solved, or how will you measure when it's done? Because those are questions that in their mind every day come up. And so if you can figure out how to ask these from their frame of reference, they won't feel like they're educating you when maybe you should already know this, okay? And this is a skill. And it's one that doesn't matter how good you are today, it's really how good you get tomorrow. Continually improve. And if you're going to call somebody, before you call, ask yourself the question, if I got this call, would I be glad I got it? And if you can't answer yes to it, you're not ready to make the call. And if you're going to send an email to somebody, ask the same question. If I got this email, would I be glad I got it? And if you can't answer yes, don't send it. And a simple way to teach yourself to think like the customer, and Brian, with your permission, I'll pick on you a minute. In your survey you sent out, there was more first person than I would ideally want, okay? Because it starts right out with we. And of course, if I'm the customer, when you start out with we, I'm not sure I'm in there at all. And it really was a pretty good survey. But when it starts right out with we and what we want, then if I'm the customer, I'm at least apprehensive. So when you write or call, do as little first person as possible. And so that's the first rule, and that takes practice. But you'll get good at it if you just write emails with no we, me, and company name in it. It forces you to address the conceptual issue. Success in a project like this requires clear outcomes. What are the three most important things you need? That's different than I need to know three things. So, and as soon as you change that, literally their body language changes. So that's the first one. The second one is common language. We used a glossary here. If you create a glossary for them, Billy, and give them, here's the 10 key words that are really important in this project, and I just wanted to share them with you and make sure that when we use this, you know what that means, and when you say this, I know what you mean. Very much helps put them relaxed, and it also gives you leverage immediately, because if you know what they mean, and they know what you mean, all of a sudden things can move smooth. So create some kind of common, even if it's just 10 words.
Would it make sense to ask that of them as well? Because we're kind of getting into a field of, construction. We don't know anything about it. And I think that it would be valuable for us to know some of the terminology from their perspective.
I think, if you gave them your 10 words or 20 words or whatever, and you were to ask them, what words that you guys use all the time are you not sure that we would necessarily understand the same way you do.
Yeah.
Very much from their frame of reference. Who doesn't want to be understood?
Yeah.
We want to make sure we understand you guys. You know, and if you've gotten 2 or 3 words written down that are examples already, you know, when somebody says estimating, you know, we all know what estimating means in general, but do we really know what it means there?
Yeah.
So if you can give them 2 or 3 examples of words that you think they know or that you think you know, but you're not sure,
Yeah.
and you'd like to have them, or even say, with your permission, we'll jot these down on our weekly call. We'll make sure we get clear definitions from you.
Yeah.
So part of this is about, they want you, you're very right on and sensitive to the fact they want you to do the work with as little requirement from them as possible.
Yeah.
So the greater structure you bring, so there's less randomness to the process, they're going to like it better.
Yeah.
And so if you set the expectations up front, we need to be absolutely sure we understand the language you use the same way, and we have some words that you probably need to understand that we use. Then you can manage that process for them.
Yeah.
Right? One of the things, I would take a page out of Brian's page book or playbook. Think about using something like SurveyMonkey to gather the information you need. And particularly, my guess is the information will fall into 4 or 5 different buckets. You know, one bucket is probably CFO kinds of stuff. One's probably estimator kinds of stuff. One's probably on the job kind of stuff. You know, one might be logistics kind of stuff. And don't try and cover everything at once. You know, make it small enough that nobody looks at it and says, oh my gosh, it's a nightmare. And consider using surveys. For you, selfishly, one of the reasons to use surveys is if you ask 5 of them the same question, what do you think the odds are you'll get the same answer 5 times?
Not very high.
Yeah, approaches 0 really fast. And so by the fact that you get 5 answers from them gives you the opportunity to honor them by saying, this question, we didn't always get the same answer. And when we write software, we have to know what the answer to this question is. Help us understand how to meet your needs best.
So we have a point person there that we talk to. Would you recommend going beyond that and sending it out to the end user and bypassing her, or would?
I think bypassing her is dangerous.
Yeah, that's the challenge. That would be the challenge for us, I think, is.
Well, here's a way to address that. If they want you to manage the process, when you say to somebody, our normal process are to do a series of surveys so that we collect the really critical information, minimal amount of time. People can take these surveys typically in 10 minutes a bite or whatever you end up with it being. They can do it at their own leisure. They can do it on their phone. They can do it in their office. They can answer this anytime they want. And so rather than taking a lot of time from your team, this again is all from their frame of reference, you're really saying, I need the information, but we've designed this to make this so easy for you and make sure we get exactly what we need so that what we come back to you with is what you want.
Yeah.
And so I would say to her, this is how we normally do it. Does that work here?
So ask for permission, and then
I would go a step more stronger, and I say, this is the process that works best.
okay.
Is this okay?
Yeah.
So in a sense, you're asking for permission, but you're being a thought leader in doing it.
Okay.
Because I think we've talked before, they want you to be the thought leader.
Yes, definitely. We're finding that out for sure.
And so when you come to them with, this is the best practice we're aware of, this saves your team time, I don't have to pull all your people together, this is an easy way for them to get us what we need. We expect, I would even set the expectation, we expect we're going to get slightly different answers, and then we're going to come back to you, the point person, to help us clarify.
Okay.
That makes them a hero.
Yeah.
So one of the other issues you brought up, and this is an issue every one of us has, and that is humans have different communication preferences. If you send me a text, the likelihood I'll ever see it approaches 0 really fast. I don't do text. I sit in front of a computer all day long. So if it doesn't show up on my computer screen, I don't know it's there. I'm not ignoring it on purpose. I just don't look at my phone every 6 hours. So send me an email or call me secondarily. Text is way out there someplace. Other people, if you don't send them a text, you're never going to talk to them. And so it's important that we understand the preferred way to communicate. And if you're going to talk to that point person all the time, your whole team better know how she likes to communicate.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say to you in this situation is certain things just got to be in writing.
Yeah.
So if you talk to her on the phone, make it a standard procedure. I'm just going to follow up and send you an email on this so that, we both got a copy of it. Because what will happen, I can almost guarantee it, over the life of your project, there'll be 2 or 3 times you're going to save her butt because it's in writing. And she can go show it to somebody else, and she can say, I forwarded this to you. Because when somebody has to forward oral communication to 2 or 3 people, that's really hard. So, those are the first communication pieces. Their frame of reference, come up with some kind of standard language set. You need to lead on how we're going to communicate, because if the communication falls down, they're not going to blame themselves for a delayed project. Somehow you're going to get blamed.
Yeah.
So you got to manage the communication, and certain things just got to be in writing.
Yeah.
Does any of this help?
Yep.
Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
Okay. Now let's jump to the revenue resources required. First, can you see how the communication can have an impact on the revenue resources required?
Yeah.
Give me a couple examples.
I think development for sure would be a big part of that. If we can get the requirements sent over and we know we have a direction, it's going to cut down on development time. If we are precise and really dial in the type of communication we have, the support, the amount of time of support is going to go down. I think the amount of time planning is going to go down. So all over the board, I can see a lot of benefits.
And one of the things for you, and actually for most everybody on the phone, if you're a thought leader, people do not expect T&M work. Okay, you expect T&M work from laborers, and you expect T&M work in commoditized things.
Yeah.
I know some industries, Brian's industry has grown up on T&M work to a large extent, but there's a transition coming today. And if you're really good at what you do, you can probably do it. You can probably bring them more value with less labor than the person who's just kind of muddling through it. In which case means you make more money because you brought them more value, you get paid for more value, and you're actually doing it faster. So as you think about revenue resources required, one of the things you're thinking about is, I probably am supposed to be fixed price. So if I'm supposed to be fixed price, I got to get good at managing this.
Yeah.
Because if I don't manage it and it's fixed price, it's coming out of my pocket.
Right.
So the kind of the key on all of this is for you to take your best guess at those variable items that are part of your map. Okay? You don't need to put the cell phones in it. They're not really part of the map. You don't need to put your building rent into it or your building insurance into it. Look at those things that are part of your selling, marketing, and delivery costs specific to this. And what you'll find, you know, in the project that you just started, 80–90% of all your costs will be part of these variable costs for delivering the work. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. So what you're really trying to measure is, and when you think about the flow, you're really saying, I got all these resources I'm investing to move this deal from we sold it to we're going to deliver it and they're going to pay us for the whole thing. So as I look at that whole map and I look at the resources I'm committed, I'm asking myself the question, what could I do to decrease the resources? Now, one of the ones I'd suggest that comes back to communication, I suggest you get really good at Zoom.
Yeah.
You know, and if it's not Zoom, pick another tool.
Yeah, we're using GoToMeeting.
Use GoToMeeting and build it into your business process. Because one of the things that seems to be true, not a lot of research yet, but seems to be true, that GoToMeeting, Zoom, you know, one of the web tools, what it does is we all like personal time, or a lot of us do, but what this does is it gives us more rapidity. If you have a problem, we can have a conference in 30 minutes. I don't have to get on a plane. I don't have to pull my people off a job. They can go sit in their truck, get out their cell phone, and we can have a GoToMeeting. And so build it in as part of your process that you're going to have weekly GoToMeetings, and when there's an emergency, we're going to do everything we can to get all the critical people assembled in a quick GoToMeeting so that we can make a decision and move on. Because when you think about your revenue resources required, if you could cut a half a day a week out of the teams over a 4-month project, that probably means you're finishing the thing almost, 4 days early, and you got 4 days less cost, and you got the revenue 4 days quicker. And so that's why you do this. You just get your numbers, you highlight those things that you see are directly connected to this revenue, and then you're managing against them.
Yeah.
And as you do this for your second and third project, you start to get a feel that when I do this kind of project, my historical revenue resources required are 60% of the top. And I'm going to continue to try and drive it down to 50 because the rest for you is margin.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Yeah.
Okay. Anything else you want to do right now?
No. Thank you for that.
And I'm assuming these are two of the areas that you're going to work on going forward.
Yeah, definitely. Yep.
Okay. Who wants to go next?
Thank you. Am I unmuted?
Yes.
Okay. I can go.
Okay.
So the two things I think we want to work on. One is what I sent you guys, which is the customer survey. That's part of what we talked about last week. Hold on, I'm going to switch screens.
We're getting feedback from
So-
somebody.
It could be here. If it gets too bad, then I may have to just listen. There's a speaker over my head and people all around me. So let me know if.
Keep trying it then, because I think it was a speaker over your head.
Okay, maybe I could shield that out. So the thing with the customer survey is to try and work on our accountability and our metrics, the way that we can measure that for our flow. So for each of those phases that we talked about last week, we want to have specific people that are responsible for specific things. And one of the things I talked about is part of that is getting that customer feedback. Along the same lines, I want to test our assumptions, because I feel like we are making a lot of assumptions about what we think our clients find important and what we think sets us apart. But maybe they don't think that's as important as we think it is. So that's a lot of what that whole what I want to work on in that whole area. For a second one, Rick, I was looking at the slides, and let me find it. The behavioral outcomes, that chart that you had on that.
Let's see.
Found.
Can you see the
it
number
looks
on
like
it?
Hold on. Maybe 21.
Yep. Okay, not 21.
I feel like it was maybe just a couple slides down, maybe one more row down. But that one right there, 33.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So that one really intrigued me because it's behavioral based, and it would be great to have more of that set up where we can literally look at steps and say, okay, this is good, this is bad, this one should move on based on the, something that we can actually look at and measure. So I'd love to set up that for our offers, not sure which offer, but at least one of them.
Couple things, Brian, you've given me such good stuff. I want to give you some feedback before I miss it.
Rick, I'm going to put it back. I'm going to mute myself again so that I can listen.
One of the things for all of us that Brian talked about that is, I just can't even stress how important it is, and that is to test assumptions. And particularly to test assumptions for our perceived niches and ideal buyers. Because if we don't focus the assumption testing on the ideal buyer, we run the risk that someplace on the bell curve, probably we can find somebody that likes everything. And that's not helpful. What's helpful is if we believe that there's a particular kind of property owner that owns, multiple shopping centers or complexes, and that's our customer, that's where we want to test the assumptions. And that's so important, because when you think of that before conversation where you're really establishing the value, if you understand what they believe to be true, then that before conversation is powerful. But if you're not talking to people who they have the same assumptions that you do, then you're delivering a great conversation to the wrong person. And so I cannot stress assumption testing strong enough. And for many of us, that's where we have trouble with a sales team, if we have a sales team. Because if we have salespeople, many of them have a different set of assumptions than their customers do. And we're typically listening to our salespeople instead of their customer. And so our salespeople are giving us information they really believe is true based on their assumptions. but those assumptions don't match with who we think their customer is. So this is really, really important. And it's a skill, and it's similar to the skill Billy was working on of how do I communicate from the buyer's frame of reference? Well, that's the testing assumptions help you understand the buyer's frame of reference. And so it's as Vistage teaches you about clarifying questions and solidifying that what somebody said is really what they meant to say and that you understand it the same way they do. That's huge in that assumption testing. So I just don't want us to lose that. The second thing, I loved your use for the survey. And I've got to find your survey because I do want to show that today. I got to remember.
Brian, I did take the survey. So you might have one rogue record in there.
Let's see if I can.
I was planning on everybody taking it. I'll wipe all that info out. So thank you for doing it.
Do you know where the email came from? Like, do you know who? Is it anonymous?
No, it's not. I can look at every specific survey individually.
So I'm wondering, are we open to some feedback here or what?
Yeah. I'm going to find the survey online, so keep going.
So I think the first two questions, Brian, that you have in your survey are a little redundant. You already know who it is that filled out the survey.
Okay.
I would imagine you could probably gather that information just by knowing who it is.
Oh, like how long they've worked with us, and yeah. Actually, I stole those from the default survey that I started with, but you're right. Yeah, we should already know that.
And then if you are going to keep those, I'm wondering if maybe you could put those at the end, because they're a little more. I mean, they're simple to answer, and they kind of, check out of answering the survey. It's not hard to finish.
Right.
And then the other thing, there were the two about communication.
Yeah.
I believe it was 6 and 7.
Yeah.
I'm wondering that, to me, they kind of merged together. So I'm wondering if there's a different way to word those, maybe field versus office or something like that. It seems like they're kind of the same thing, but I'm guessing you're wanting to know that's probably touching a different part of your business.
Right. Yeah. One's before we start the job and one is during and after.
So I'm just wondering if you could kind of use some different verbiage to differentiate there.
Because it feels like I'm asking the same question twice.
Right.
Okay.
Other feedback for Brian? Brian, the other thing, I applaud the survey approach. I think it is a little more from your frame of reference than from there.
Right.
And for an example, one of the questions I think that if I were your customer, I would like is, what else would you like us to help you with? And then list 3 or 4 things that you assume they might like, and let them tell you which ones they might like. Because that's a way to clarify your assumptions.
Sure.
And just to, I've got so many. For those of you who remember the buyer-seller gap, one of the things the research said was the buyer wants you to understand them. The buyer wants you to have excellent communication skills. The buyer wants you to focus on post-sales, and the buyer wants you to give them insight and perspective. So you could have questions on there as to how well you did in these areas. Did you understand their business as well as they hoped you would? You can make a better question than that, but that's not a difficult one to do. And was our communication clear to you at all times, or most of the time, or hardly ever. You know, you might take these pieces, which is what the buyers really are telling us they want us to do for them, and just see what kind of feedback you get.
Sure.
So, then the other one I want to go to. I remember this one. This is one of my favorite tools for high value. Well, if you think about your roadmap, the volume, velocity, and value, this does not work if you're selling newspapers where your velocity and volumes are off the chart. You don't have time to do this. But where you're dealing with a relatively small number of suspects, leads, qualified leads, and customers, this is a really great tool, because as a team, you don't move something from gold until the human you're working with has demonstrated through behavior. They've either raised their hand and said, hey, I'd like to talk about how you guys could help me, or it looks like you guys do cool stuff that we've been trying to figure out. Let's have a conversation. Or they've been in your website every day for the last 2 months reading every post you got. You know, there are clear behavioral activities, because if you do it that way, and you can then be dealing with only those buyers who are highly likely to buy. That's why, you know, we talk about, we do have the ability to predict. You know, if we're dealing with people who haven't been on our website, they've never looked at what we do, they've never been out to one of our sites, they don't know any of our customers, you know, how likely can we predict out of 10 of them that are going to buy anything from us? It's virtually impossible. But if they've been in our site, they were referred by somebody, they used to work for one of our customers and now they're a GM someplace else. Come on, we can get highly predictable as to where we want to spend our human resources based on their behaviors in response to questions, opportunities, data, whatever it is we're doing. We can see how they're responding to it. Is that where you were going, Brian? Okay. So I think those, and it's interesting, those are highly aligned. You know, the accuracy and accountability of the understanding, the communication with the customer, the assumptions is really part of the communication with the customer, and managing this process is delivering information that the customer behaviorally responds to for you to be able to figure out what to do next. So those are all nicely aligned. And so as you get good at one, it's going to help the other two. That makes sense? Joe, you got 2 cents in that one too?
I'm sorry, I got my office phone ringing at the same time, Rick. What'd you say?
Well, I was just asking, I'm sure you've got something to add to this.
As far as the test and assumptions and stuff, or?
Well, you know, as Brian was talking about the survey and the assumptions and, you know, the behavioral metrics, I just was curious if you had anything you wanted to add.
No, when you mentioned the ideal buyers, testing the assumptions of the ideal buyers, I think that's our initial goal, but eventually we want to be sending this out to all basically the customers that we work with, hoping to turn some of them into ideal buyers based on these answers. You know what I mean? Yes.
And my coaching on that one for you is, when you're going to test, you have two general states. One is, we think they should be ideal buyers for offers we already have. Mm-hmm. Or we're thinking about creating a new offer because we think we see a problem that the market's not solving and we can, which may mean you're sharing a new offer with a new group of potential buyers.
Right. Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. And would those almost be two different surveys then? Or
Yes, probably.
different questions for sure.
Yes, yes. Because what you'd really be doing is you'd be talking about a slightly different problem, or even if it's the same problem, maybe a different way you solve it. You know, because you may have a big general contractor solution. I would guess your service business has different components than your general contractor business.
Mm-hmm.
And so it could be that different, even though a lot of the work you do is similar. Who you do it for and the way they want it done is different.
Right, like the survey we're using now is for customers that we've worked for and done projects for, where as if we're going to start targeting for a specific offer like repair work, we would be asking a different series of questions, looking to try and, like the number one question from the buyer-seller gap, trying to understand their needs that we don't understand yet.
Yep. And it is amazing if you use a tool like that and you literally ask for help. People will help. There's tons of research that humans really want to help other people. And so if you go to them and say, we think there's something going on out here, and we'd like your help understanding exactly what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And then send them the survey, you'll be surprised how many will answer it and how truthful they'll be.
Right. Especially if it sparks some interest in what they're doing. And the idea behind this is obviously to be targeting people in our specific area. Would be property managers and owners and things like that experience these types of problems might not be a daily basis, but monthly, quarterly, whatever it is.
Joe, that's perfect. When we used to do this for a living with the huge companies in the world, we would call people and say, our Siemens or Philips or whoever it is creating this new thing. We think you're the poster child for it. And before we spend another $50 million finishing it, we'd like to know if this really solves any problems for you. Now, you'd say it different, but the human part of it's the same. We think you're the poster child for this. We think you struggle with these issues all the time. And if so, maybe there's going to be a solution for you coming up. Because what's safe for them is you're not saying, I want to sell you something tomorrow. What you're saying is, I want to understand your problem.
Right. And when you get to that problem, you'll have somebody to call that can help you. Instead of just going online and looking.
When we would go in and do that, and I didn't even work for Siemens. I couldn't take an order if they wanted to give it to me. But what would happen is they'd say, hey, look, have somebody call us. We want to do this. And so we got more leads than the salespeople did. And we were there specifically not to sell. But it was that dynamic of we were there to help them. When they realized, wow, there is help, then they wanted it.
Right. Definitely.
Excellent. Anything else? Joe, Brian? Okay. Trevor, Andrew, who wants to go next?
I can go.
Okay.
Two of our top areas that I would like to work on and kind of our business development team work on. One, it's definitely kind of a high priority for us coming up these next couple of months is kind of a new marketing kind of strategy. Really, we've kind of gone off of that document that Brian sent over with the flow chart or the flow management roadmap.
Yep.
It's really the initial stage of where does most of our marketing come from, and a lot of it's just right now based on relationships with my business partner who was in the industry for 15 years at a senior executive level. So just his acquaintances that he's built throughout the years that he was there. So outside of that, we really don't have, unless we're cold calling or trying to go through other relationships, we don't really have a marketing strategy in terms of penetrating markets. So that's kind of become a priority here in the next couple of months of finding, a company or someone to help us develop a marketing plan, marketing message. Now that we've grown so much in the last year, really get us a new kind of message a voice to get out, so we don't have to always be cold calling people where they can see our stuff at if it's conferences or like the trade shows, or just talking to other people and have material so they know exactly who we are. So that's kind of our big one. That's kind of upcoming. Our second one, so that's on the when you have the behavioral stuff charts up, is kind of the front half there, the yellow and gold. And the other one that we have is more on the blue to red, from kind of close a contract to the delivery. And it's really the onboarding process that we've done it once to a certain extent in our most recent large contract, but we've had some difficulties in doing it the 2 other times with some smaller contracts. So it's really for us to kind of review and make sure we get this process hammered out, but really the onboarding between our operations team and the operations team at the transplant centers or the OPOs, making sure we're aligned on, how their lingo of what they call certain items and, the medical field compared to what we've called them with other clients before, where the surgeons in certain areas like to be picked up compared to others, all the little things, intricacies that are different in each and every client. So really getting that onboarding process, our business development team is kind of taking the lead in building a document for them this last time, and it's really keeping it make sure we get all the information that's pertinent to what our operations teams need, and make sure they're comfortable and ready to go when we actually go live with our operations or services to the client. So those are our 2 that I'd really like to work on over these next 6 to 8 months, 9 months, however many months are left this year, that really helps kind of smooth over the operations side for growing the revenue, as well as kind of getting our name out there a little bit more to increase hopefully prospects, so more of our volumes.
Who's got some questions or comments for Andrew?
Andrew, with that last deployment that you guys did, was it down in Texas?
Yeah.
Have you guys had any follow-up meetings, any debriefings on that to see, kind of go over what worked and what didn't work?
Oh yeah. We've had kind of a part of the onboarding process is to have pretty much weekly meetings since we signed the contract till we went live, and then another month after that. So we just last week we started going bi-weekly now, of kind of reporting meetings with their staff, operations team in Texas, and then our kind of senior executive staff here, to make sure what's being missed, what's chances to improve, just kind of little things. But yeah, we've had reporting or weekly meetings for the last 6 to 8 weeks with them. That's definitely helped us as well, and we've spent a lot of time down there just with our executives and our dispatchers and some of our drivers, to just kind of learn the lay of the land a little bit. Obviously it's different than being here in Phoenix, so it's just kind of getting them a see where the hospitals are and how traffic flows and all that.
How do you guys document these things?
So we created a Excel worksheet pretty much that has I can share it on my screen, but it's we have like demographics as a tab, transplant centers as a tab, donor hospitals as a tab. So all like locations where our drivers would be going out to, emergency contacts and staff contacts for the operations team of the client, aircraft charters. So when we need to find an aircraft, we have it all listed out. It's kind of something we threw together, my partner and I here in business development, real quick, from just what our knowledge was when we were out there trying to sell to them and align with them. We just threw it all in a big Excel document, and they've continuously, our dispatch team's been, I can see them editing it because it's a shared document, so they're continuously editing it, adding in more information as they needed.
Other questions, comments, suggestions? Otherwise, you got to listen to the meeting. Is that you, Brian?
Yeah, I think that is me. Sorry.
Yeah.
Does it help if I cover it up?
Yeah. Did you have comments for him or questions?
I did. I was just going to say that Andrew, as I hear you talk about your business process and all that stuff, I'm consistently impressed with how well you guys do with communication. And when Billy asked that question, I was kind of thinking the same thing. What does that look like? And the fact that you do this massive onboarding and have these weekly meetings and you get that feedback is definitely, I hear that stuff and I'm like, man, I'd really like to do that more with what we do. I'm going to be interested to see what Rick has to say about the whole marketing thing. Because we don't really do any marketing either. And I've kind of wondered that, do we get someone out of house? Do we try and learn to do that in-house? Like, what does that sort of look at? So with that, I'm going to mute again.
Other comments for Andrew?
Andrew, as far as the documentation goes, that spreadsheet you said was a shared document? Is that like on a Google Drive or?
Yeah, it's the Microsoft OneDrive.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's like Google Drive, but it's just through Microsoft, so you can save live pages and everything.
Is it easy to search for certain keywords
within the drive?
Yeah.
Or within the document? I'm sure you could go. It's a normal Excel sheet. It's just saved, so you probably just go just like the Finder on it, and you'd probably be able to find it pretty easily. I haven't done it yet, but I'm sure it's just kind of like a normal Excel. You just Control F or Command F, and you can find something.
So one of the things that's worked for us is, like, instead of throwing everything in one document, when we have meetings like you're talking about, we kind of break those up into separate documents, and then we use Google Drive. So I'm assuming SharePoint, I think is what you said, is very similar. But what it allows us to do is search at the folder level. So instead of you having to go into a particular document, you can kind of search for certain things. And we go back a couple years on incidents that happened just by searching a keyword. Even though we don't really know what's going on, we're able to find that incident or that meeting, whatever it is, just by searching through the Google Drive.
Okay. Yeah, I'll have to do a little research on that and see. That's a good. I'll take that down. It's a good note to if we need to pull something quick for sure.
Yeah, it just seems like your onboarding process is going to continue to evolve. So that may be something, just kind of be able to go back and see what worked and what didn't work from things that have happened in the past.
Okay.
Other comments or questions? Okay, I want to pick up right where Billy and Andrew were a second ago. Some of you have heard me talk about how important the concept of the joint statement of work is. And what we just watched was Andrew thinking about the work from kind of the organizational standpoint. And what are all the pieces we got to move around, and who are all the players, and how do we onboard? And what we heard Billy talk about was, there's a technical side to this. There's a engineering, logistics, supply chain to this. And part of the power of doing a joint statement of work correctly is having your team represented in both parts of that thinking at the same time, and the customer having both parts of that thinking at the same time. Because if Billy were on Andrew's team and we're talking to the hospital CFO or CIO or CTO or whatever that is, they'll understand exactly what Billy's talking about, and they'll think Andrew knows everything he needs to know about this technical stuff, and it's really Billy knows it all. But to the customer, it doesn't matter. The organization has got it. And they both use the same language. I mean, Billy, that was your opening question. How do we have the same language? Well, part of it in the scenario of Andrew's is he's got to have a technical guy with him that can sit there and go through all those things, because if I were the hospital and I'm a Google Drives guy, and you're on the other side, and you're a OneNote guy or whatever it is, Microsoft, I need somebody who translates. And maybe those two can translate perfectly, or at least they'll say, oh, I'll get back to you, or I'll have a call with you later and I'll show you how it works. And everything goes smooth. And so in Andrew's case, I think his issues are so big that you may have 2 or 3 sets of people on both sides. You may also need somebody who's thinking total logistics, or maybe you need a medical related person on both sides. But the more complete the team is, the faster you get to a statement of work that's closer and closer to bulletproof. And from the customer standpoint, the better, Andrew, you guys manage that. I mean, manage it. Like I told Billy earlier, he's got to be the thought leader. He's got to tell them, we got to do these surveys. If we don't do these, we can't make sure the heart gets where it's supposed to go, or whatever it is you're doing. And so you need to be professional and partnered with them, but you're the leader. And so the tighter that process is, the faster they'll sign, the more they'll pay, and the less problems you'll have.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is really, really, really important. So the other thing I heard in there, do you do controlled launches? In other words, do you just launch for one hospital or 2, or do you typically launch organization-wide?
It really depends on kind of the client. Like in Texas, we launched with the OPO first, and then we've slowly brought along each transplant center. In other areas, we've gone all in, right, all together at the same time. And in one other area, we've gone just with one transplant center. That's it so far. So it really depends on the area and the client of who wants to use our services.
From your standpoint, if you have a big client, is there a reason you can't do a controlled first 3 months or something?
No, I don't think so. I think it's it really just goes with for us talking with them and just making sure they're okay with us, rolling it out, in kind of a set structure instead of just going all in all at once, which some prefer. Some of these clients do prefer that, just to make sure we're aligned on each step of the way, and so we incrementally get to being fully on board.
Yeah, because and I'm making this up because I don't know it to be true, but I would guess that it is. From your from everybody's standpoint, going all in, there's more risk.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm guessing there's also more cost.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, when you're doing that joint statement of work, if everybody declares the additional risk and the additional cost, my guess would be, if you have to go all in, you at least get to charge more, because you told them up front, if we're going to do all in, we got to have additional bodies. We can't just rely on the A team. We got to have the A and B team all ready to go all at the same time. Just say it better than that.
Right.
That's what the conversation really is. And so it's one of those ways where up front, you're having the conversation to set the value. If you want to go all in, if that's something you have to do politically or contractually for some reason, we're okay with that. It makes the joint statement of work more important, so there's more front end work because there's more places to map, and the data structure is bigger, and more people to train, and so on and so forth. We'll do it, but just recognize there's more cost, and that way you build it in, and you guys hopefully make more money out of it because you're taking more risk.
Right.
So that was the first thing. And it's interesting, as you talked about the yellow and the gold, and then going the blue to the red. The blue to the red is virtually that joint statement of work.
Mm-hmm.
And you should have red humans in that joint statement of work conversation.
Yep.
And because the red humans who are in that joint statement of work conversation, now when the work comes to them, they were part of designing it.
Right.
So, we'll keep talking about, because joint statements of work are incredibly important. I know Stan Sipes, who's in your group, I think. Stan's still in the group?
Yeah.
Okay. You know, Stan, when he went to the joint statement of work, I think he said it took, you know, months out of their sales process, and it really tightened up their rollouts. So, you know, I think you'll get the same kind of thing out of it. Now, and the other part of it is, and there's a point where a joint statement of work can have too many people in it, but your sale is to multiple potential veto people in your buyer group. Is that a true statement? You know, there's financial, there's hospital, there's logistics, there's...
Yeah.
Is that true? So
Yeah.
To the extent that you can have the most important ones in that process and they become part of the process, then they're less likely to veto it or argue against it or try and keep the costs down. So to the extent that you can make that a way to create motivation and team can really make a huge difference. So, okay, having said that, let's talk about the gold and the yellow part. The marketing part there, Brian. The first thing is when we look at this slide and we're trying to figure out how to identify suspects that are as close to ideal buyers who live in our niche, have the problem, and will be compelled to pay what's necessary to solve it. When we think about that, there's a whole series of things, and when we use this as a way to measure people moving through that flow, we have to look for some tools. And when you're going to get somebody who's never heard of you before and they're a suspect, they're in yellow, what's the behavior that they are likely, what are examples of behaviors that would move them from yellow into the gold? What behaviors would you see?
Rick, were you asking me that question, or are we still on Andrew?
Well, I'm on anybody who wants to answer it. Anybody got any ideas? Okay. A simple example would be if you're at a trade show and somebody walks in your booth. Okay. Another example is they're looking for something online and they find your site. Another one could be they're at a conference and they hear you speak. Another one could be somebody says, "Hey, have you talked to these guys?" So there's different ways that people who you've never heard of, they've never heard of you, all of a sudden they know you exist, and there's something about what they heard, saw, or read that said, maybe I better learn a little more. You know, if we look at websites and the statistics on Google, it's not unusual somebody comes to your site and they're gone in less than 10 seconds, okay? But those that stay, and when they're there 2 minutes, that's a major accomplishment. They've looked at your site, they said there's something here, and so you move somebody from yellow to gold with whatever that something was. Now, one of the reasons we push so hard on what's the customer's problem, and we got excited about Brian's cool, you know, when he got that up in the brand promise and the problem he solves, the cool structures, is that's something that somebody might stop, look at, and say, I got to see what a cool structure is. Now you got them for 2 minutes. And what they may then do is bookmark it or copy the URL and, you know, put it into a file so they can come back to it. Because when they go from first investigating it to coming back and rereading and reading blogs and watching your webinar, now you got somebody who's in early qualifying of you. Okay, is this part making sense? Now, this is almost like a prism, because if you have the right software, while they're investigating you and they're early qualifying you, what should you be doing?
Checking them out.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. If you have the right software, you see they came into your site. In order to get to the webinar, they had to pass you their email address. You know who they are. You know how many times they've been back. You know what they've read. You're starting to investigate them. And if you're, you know, in Andrew, your case, certainly Brian's case, and Billy, your new business side, you want to know enough about them to make a decision. Do I want to invest any of those revenue resources required in them? Okay? Because some of them I do and some of them I don't. Now, I might not want to invest in them, but maybe they're doing this for their dad, and their dad, you know, owns half the world, so that's okay. You don't insult anybody or be mean, but you're not going to go chase them because there's not anything there to chase. Now, so I want to do a timeout. Something got them out of suspects into investigate, whether it's the cool problem you solve or whether it's graphics or videos or a reference from somebody else. Something got them in. Now, if they go farther than just to spend 30 seconds or a minute with you, and they start to read stuff, or they start to look at references, now think of that as content, and think of that as reusable content. Because the content that got them to be willing to spend more time on your site may also show up later in the process. Anybody got an idea where content that hooked somebody in early qualify got them to say, wow, you guys could be cool? Where else could that show up in our process? We'll pick on Andrew for a minute. Andrew, when you're doing a joint statement of work and you now have 2 or 3 people from the customer side you're just meeting for the first time, after they've met you, or even before, when somebody schedules them, you're going to be on the call with, you know, Andrew and his team. What do you think those people do when they're told they're going to be on the call?
Do a little research, potentially look at website or any marketing material that they picked up.
So they're going right back to the same material that hooked the first person the first time.
Right.
So when you think about marketing, think about those things that compel, add value, wow, clearly identify you know how to solve their problem, clearly identify you hear where they are, you have empathy for their business, because you need it to get them involved to begin with. And then you need it farther in the process, because everybody's going to, you know, all of you are you know, maybe other than some of Trevor's aren't, some of his can be small dollar, but some of his corporate accounts can be really big dollar. So when we're talking big dollars, you got half a dozen people looking at the deal. And so you got half a dozen people, they have to have things to look at that say we're the right place. So one of the most important things you're going to do for all of your businesses is create compelling content that aligns to your brand promise, the problem you solve, and is specifically sharing the value of your offer. It's important they like your company, but they don't buy your company, they buy your offer. That's why that offer creation is so important, because that's what they're ultimately going to decide, are they going to give you money for. And in the example of both, and I know Brian does this as well, but today in the conversations both with Billy and Andrew, you're both doing a joint statement of work process, and the offer is the starting place for that. The offer really says, here's the 10 things that this is going to accomplish for you. Now we're going to show you how you get there. And 2 of those parts of the offer are training and onboarding, or whatever they are. So the offer's got 10 outcomes and 4 steps in order to get to the outcomes. That's our offer, those 14 things. So think content, think how am I going to track, and that's why I was thrilled that, you know, Brian brought this one up, because if I spend money on content, and whether I go to a trade show or I do a search engine optimization, or I do keywords, or I do blogs, or I do white papers, or whatever it is I do, I really have to track it through this process. If nobody ever finds it, even if I wrote a great white paper, who cares? If they find it, but nobody takes more than 7 seconds to look at it and they're gone, I need to rethink my landing page. And so that's why this is so important, because the human behavioral outcome determines whether we either have the right stuff or the right stuff in the right process. And that's why it's continuous improvement. Because if you have the right stuff and you get 10 people to respond, if you change 2 words on your landing page, you might get 40. And so you've already paid for the content, you've already paid for everything, you're just changing a few words. Now all of a sudden you get 4 times as many people go through the process. So it's this continuously improving this end-to-end process. And, you know, so your marketing ends up being highly digitally based on a process. It's a digital process for most of you. And content's king. Because when we say when you talk about your brand promise, your content better align with your promise. When you talk about the problem you solve, your content better align with the problem. When you talk about a niche you're going to dominate, your content better align to the niche. So once you think that way, it does get a lot simpler, because there's 100 things you're not going to do. Doesn't mean there's not a lot of work. There is. But it's pretty focused.
Yeah.
Is that part of what you're asking, Andrew?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it definitely helps.
Okay. So the last thing I want to say on this, when I talk about content, part of your deployment starting today should include the concept of building and maintaining a content library. Okay? Much of the content library is going to be populated with things that are virtually free to use. And by that I mean, Brian, when you guys do a new building, you take lots of pictures, right? That's a perfect example of virtually free content. You were already going to take the pictures. Now you're just going to make sure that they go in, the special ones go into the content library, and they may front a landing page, or they may be included in a email campaign, or, you know, there's lots of ways to reuse those great photos of the great work you've done, okay? The same thing if, you know, Andrew, I would bet you guys, if you're not, you easily could be speaking at all kinds of conferences. Is that true? So
Yeah,
if
we
you,
could.
if you do, and I would, assuming you have somebody who likes to speak, video
Uh-huh.
every single solitary one of them, start to finish, even if you got to pay for it. Most of the time, they got somebody there, they'll do it, they'll give it to you free. Because now you take videos, if you do an hour talk, and maybe all you want is 3 30-second segments out of the hour talk to go on your website or to go with an email campaign, but it's free.
Mm-hmm.
And it tells your story. And imagine when you're doing that talk in front of the kiosk for the state of Texas. All of a sudden, you have the reference power of the state of Texas because you're standing there doing the talk when they ask you to come do it. I mean, somebody doesn't have to ask, are you guys real? The 30 seconds of video shouts you're real.
Right.
So content library has got to be one of those habits that you start to build so that you can pull these things out and put them wherever they need to be. Billy, one of the things I love about you guys' website is that first screen, because that screen tells a big story. You know, you got the data and all the, you know, the information just kind of pops out.
Yeah.
You know, I think that's a really cool attention-getting screen. It makes me want to be there at least another minute.
I'll have to let the marketing team know that.
Yeah, yeah. And so, and again, this is another place where continuous improvement's critical. So, but start, build a content library. A lot of it can cost you next to nothing. And, you know, whether you do videos, you do written blogs, whether you choose to do webinars or not, be fairly intentional. Make sure it's targeted about your brand promise and the problem you solve and for the niches and identifying the ideal buyers. I think that's pretty easy. So, is Trevor out there? I haven't heard from him.
I don't think he is.
Okay. I guess this 602 number, is that Brian?
That's Brian.
It's Brian's phone. Okay, I was thinking that was Trevor. Oh, well. Okay. After we've gone through this, first, was this helpful for you guys today?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So then, just saying, let me switch screens. Then for our next call, let's continue doing what you're doing, but take it to a little more written level so we can look at some of this in writing and go a little deeper into the conversations. And, you know, Billy, some of the things you were talking about as far as communications, tell us what you've tried, tell us what's worked, tell us what people, you know, how you've helped make it from the buyer's frame of reference. Because one of the things, Billy, you're so polite that it's, you know, being the thought leader may take practice on your part because your first preference is to help. And in this case, help probably is being more assertive.
Yeah.
Okay. And so for all of us, let's try and figure out how to take these things a little bit deeper. And then, you know, Brian, some of yours are moving fairly fast. You may want to add another 1 or 2 that you're going to start to work on because the first 3 are pretty well aligned. And not that there's not a lot of work to do, but there may be other parts you can easily, you know, slide into those. And are all of you okay with the going back and sharing with your group?
Yeah.
Yeah, that should be fun.
Okay, good. Because I think that's going to be really important for everybody. And it's going to be a really good chance for you to take what you're learning. And I know you're dealing with it with your own teams and with your customers. But the more people you get to share it with and the more often you get to talk about it, the more you own it. So I think that will be really, really good for all of us. And do we want to do the once a month for the end of the year? I'm seeing a yes from Brian. Okay, because I'm enjoying you guys. So this is kind of fun for me. Okay, and since we got Trevor, we're done a little bit early today, unless somebody has something they'd like to do. We good?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you guys. I think you guys did a really good job. I'm looking forward to the next week.
Yeah, thank you, Rick.
And Andrew, I'll try and make
thank you,
sure I
guys.
have the right email for you.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. See you guys.
All right. Thanks, guys.
I thank guys.